This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 331, entitled Mascunazis. Description. This flyer claims that masculists need to become Mascunazis, that is, to be consciously, deliberately obnoxious, verbally violent and rude towards the hated feminazis, who are indirectly wiping out whole populations, having taken over the divorce courts, making divorce and hence marriage such a shitty deal for men that 2/3 of young men in many countries now refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, making these hated feminazis indirect genociders who have to be stopped. If a sex war killing millions of women is to be avoided, milder methods to stop the feminazis need to be employed. One way may be for masculists to employ Mascunazi tactics to cause feminazis to fear Mascunazis, so that the feminazis stop their resistance to preventing the menfairing of the gender laws. Mascunazi haranguing of feminazis is preferable to shooting them, but the latter remains an option of the masculists in a sex war to prevent the feminazis wiping out whole populations as they are indirectly currently doing. This flyer itself. Mascunazis by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. The word Mascunazi is obviously the male equivalent of the word feminazi, that is, a masculist who is consciously, deliberately obnoxious, that is, hurtful and rude to fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist third-wave hypocrites, giving them more than a taste of their own medicine in order to destroy them, without having to resort to bitch-slapping or even worse, bullets, in a sex war, killing millions of them. Why the need for masculists to become Mascunazis? Because the fluffy feminist hypocrites have to be destroyed so that whole populations are not indirectly wiped out by the takeover of the divorce courts by these hated fluffy feminist hypocrites who treat men as cash machines to be abused, robbed and discarded. Such women are hated by men, and certainly by the masculists, who when masculists are confronted by such women, masculists need to turn into Mascunazis and abuse these women with real masculist venom, hatred and greatly superior male anger, using men's higher levels of testosterone, men's much greater anger levels that usually scare the shit out of women, who usually run away to hide when a man gets really angry. Masculists are conscious that the hated feminazis have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for males that in a string of major countries now, for example the US, Japan, Germany, etc., 2/3 of young men under 35 refuse to marry, reject paternity, the huge issue, and spend their money on themselves. The feminazi-controlled divorce courts are so toxic for men that men are really learning to hate these feminazis, with growing talk within the masculist movement of a sex war to stop the child-minded, grossly irresponsible behaviour and abusive power of these indirect genociders, who are the root cause for why such a high proportion of young men refuse to be fathers. These feminazis don't give a shit about the men they financially massacre in the divorce courts. They are fluffy feminist hypocrites, having had their feminist consciousnesses raised, and so are angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, but know nothing about masculism, being unaware of how women oppress men far more than vice versa, due to women's financial parasitism, female manslavery, the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, the red pill nature of women, that is, not loving men, but rather men's sexploitability, women's lifelong nagging, etc. The masculists are now supplying men with intellectual tools so that they can become Mascunazis, able to beat the feminazis at their own game by haranguing them with real male anger and hatred at what the feminazi hypocrites have done to men, particularly in the divorce courts, by rejecting the paternity rejection right, etc. In order to stop the feminazis indirectly wiping out whole populations, as they are currently doing, by making divorce so toxic for men that they've made marriage toxic for men. Modern marriage is such a shitty deal for men that 2/3 of young men reject paternity and go their own way, spending their money on themselves. This is a gender crime on a massive scale that the feminazis need to be punished for. In the limit, responsible males, masculist soldiers, will not tolerate that these feminazi bitches indirectly wipe out whole populations, so will go on a sex war to stop them, shooting them if necessary in a sex war. Of course, such drastic measures may not be necessary. There are alternative means to stopping the hated feminazis in their tracks, and that is to behave as Mascunazis against them, giving them a real taste of their own medicine, haranguing them with real masculist hatred, outdoing them at their own game, scaring them shitless with displays of real male venom, hurling valid and highly emotional criticism at them, expressing male hatred for what these hated feminazi bitches are doing, so that they are forced to give up their gender criminal power in the divorce courts, so that women fear the Mascunazis and are motivated to vote with men to menfair the gender laws, so that men are prepared to be fathers again, without running the current risk of having his life ruined with a 1 chance in 4 of being financially crucified in favour of his fluffy feminist ex-wife in a fluffy hypocrite-dominated divorce court system taken over by the hated gender criminal fluffy feminist hypocrites. Men need to have their masculist consciousnesses raised so that they can organise and go to feminist public meetings and trash them if these feminazis unjustifiably trash men based on feminazi myths rather than scientifically verified realities. Most feminazis are iscyanate fairies, that is, are unable to reason scientifically due to a lack of knowledge of science, who support their feminazi ideology with myths rather than facts. Most feminists are iscyanate fairies who are monoconscious. They know nothing about masculism, how women oppress men, and often for many decades, sustained deeply oppressive exploitation of men, acting as manslavers, sexploiters of men's money, bribing men with sex in the short term so that men start giving women men's resources. These fluffy feminist wives then get bored with their man-slaved husbands and take them to the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system to have him financially massacred in her favour, because the lawyers and judges of this divorce court system are also fluffy feminazis who have the attitude that men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. That is, these divorce court lawyers and judges are just as much manslaving as the divorcing mothers, expecting to be able to financially destroy a man and not give a shit about his welfare. It is this massive callousness, this sadistic gender crime on such a massive scale, destroying the lives of 1 father in 4, that is the main reason why masculists have such a hatred of fluffy feminist hypocrites and are determined to destroy them, to wipe them out, so that feminazis become afraid to air their views in public through fear of being confronted by an extremely angry, bitter, murderously hateful masculist, by Mascunazis, who consciously, deliberately aim to crush the feminazis, first with words, later with bitch slaps, then fist, and finally, if necessary, with bullets. We responsible males, in capital letters, will not tolerate that these hated feminazi bitches indirectly wipe out whole populations. It's to prevent this catastrophe that masculists become Mascunazis, to blast the hated feminazi bitches out of the room when the feminazis spread their myth-based attitudes. These feminazis want equality of outcomes by, for example, having quotas in the boardrooms of companies, having equal number of members of both sexes in the parliaments, etc. This would be fine if, in reality, men and women had the same performance score distributions, but they don't. Men outperform women across the board thanks to women's hypergamy, that is, the female instinct to mate up, to get the superior DNA of the superior man for her kids, which is beneficial for the species and hence was evolutionarily selected for. Thus, society and general overall performance levels are dominated by men. Since it is women who have a monopoly over reproduction, it is women who decide which penises ejaculate inside them, who decide what kind of children they want. The side effect of this hypergamy is that males outperform women in almost everything. So imposing female quotas, as the feminazis want, will only discriminate against men, when the lowest scoring women who are given such appointments get lower performance scores than the top scoring men who were rejected. This equality of outcomes that the feminazis want is discriminatory against men. But these feminazis don't give a shit about that. They're not about equality for both sexes. They want to benefit women at men's expense. They want to be sexist against men to the benefit of women. They are profoundly hypocritical that way, favouring women over men, and this makes masculists very angry. It's against such feminazi behaviours and attitudes that the masculists employ Mascunazi behaviour, expressing masculist hatred and anger against these feminazi bitches. Men need to first learn about masculist ideas so that they become angry at fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites, then convert themselves into becoming strongly angry Mascunazis, haranguing fluffy feminists with masculist rhetoric and real male anger, telling these feminazi bitches very clearly why men are so angry at them, so that women both understand and become fearful of Mascunazis, so that these feminists stop their oppression against men. Otherwise, a sex war will come, resulting possibly in these feminazis being killed by murderously hateful masculist soldiers who'll be prepared to kill millions of feminazis as the lesser evil in stopping the feminazi hypocrites from wiping out whole populations, as they are currently doing. Responsible males can see what is happening in the divorce courts and can see the writing on the wall, which most feminazis, being rather child-minded in their ability to see the future, are incapable of, so that it will be responsible males, masculist soldiers, who will take the gender criminal power of the feminazis in the divorce courts away from them, either with bullets or bitch-slapping them to oblivion. There's a lot at stake here. The present gender status quo in the divorce courts, the lack of a paternity rejection right, etc., cannot last. With one father in four being financially crucified and having his life destroyed means that men will snap, pick up arms and go on a sex war, because what is currently happening to men in the divorce courts, controlled by these hated feminazi hypocrites, is a war issue, and will be solved by military means if no other way is successful. Women on the whole are too solipsistic, too child-minded, with their 10% smaller brains to have enough vision to agree with the masculists. So the masculists will have to employ Mascunazi tactics to force women to menfair the gender laws. Otherwise, they may risk being killed by Mascunazi soldiers if a sex war comes, that the masculist theorists are increasingly talking about. Those more reasonable women who are not feminazi bitches need to vote with men to menfair the gender laws so as to prevent a sex war. But if most women remain loyal to their own sex at men's expense, then the sex war will be much more bitter, more hateful, as millions of women are killed. Another way to avoid a sex war is simply to convert the male law enforcers to become masculists, and then to simply quietly remove women's right to vote, which will then make the menfairing of the gender laws much easier. In practice, probably all of the above strategies will be employed by the masculists, as all such strategies lead towards the same goal, that is, men's lib, freeing men from the oppressive sexploitation of men by women, by fluffy parasites, by fluffy feminist hypocrites. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Brackets. Contains links to 300 plus YouTube, Minds, BitChute, Masculist essays/videos, and to the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 300 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses.